Let's take a look at Bylaw 14, Eligibility. This section covers many important topics, including eligibility rules for practice and competition, transfer rules, seasons of participation, and hardship waiver requirements. First, we'll review eligibility for practice and competition. For your student athletes to be eligible to practice and compete, they must be enrolled full-time and be in good academic standing at your institution. In addition, for purposes of competition, they must be enrolled in at least 12 credits, regardless of how your institution defines full-time status. For most of you, those requirements are the same. Keep this in mind when you're in the drop-add period at your institution. Make sure your student athletes are aware of this rule before they drop classes, because if they drop below 12 credits at any point, they will not be eligible to compete. Be especially careful when student athletes are dropping and adding courses on the day of your games. The transfer rules are in Bylaw 14.5. A good piece of information for you to relay to your student athletes regarding transfer is that they typically cannot transfer out of trouble, whether they have academic or athletic problems. The basic transfer rule says that if a student transfers to your institution, the student has to sit out from a competition for a year. But a student athlete may not have to sit out if he or she can meet an exception to the rule. The most common exception to the rule in Division III is when a student athlete is coming to your institution from another four-year institution. If at the point in time the student athlete comes to your institution, he or she is academically and athletically eligible at the previous institution and is also eligible under your institution's own rules, then he or she is most likely eligible to compete. There are other exceptions, including exceptions for two-year institutions, so talk to your compliance officer if your situation is different. As a coach, the other thing you need to be aware of is that you cannot contact students enrolled in another four-year institution about transferring without first getting permission. So if you know of a student who is interested in transferring to your institution, what should you do? At that point, you want to make sure you have permission to speak with that student athlete to talk about a potential transfer. If it's another Division III student athlete and they're coming from a Division III institution to your institution, then all you need to do is to have them fill out the self-release form on the NCAA webpage. A student athlete who is transferring from a Division I or a Division II institution will need to get permission from their athletics director to speak with you and your institution. Once you've started those conversations with the student athlete and have permission to speak, you will want to talk with your athletics director or your compliance coordinator on your campus immediately, and make sure you're doing what you need to do to check that student athlete's eligibility status. Now let's take a look at the season of participation rules. Generally speaking, each student athlete has 4 seasons of athletics eligibility in college per sport. If a student has had an injury at some point during the season, he or she may meet the criteria for a medical hardship waiver to get the season back, or what is commonly mislabeled as a medical redshirt. Using a season in Division III is different than in Division I or Division II. Division I and Division II measure the use of a season by whether the student athlete competes. In Division III, we measure by participation. The intent was to eliminate redshirting within Division III, so there are 2 ways to use a season of eligibility in Division III: practicing and competing. Let's break those down a little further. First, you will use a season if you practice past the first regular traditional segment game. That means if the student athlete practices even one time after the team's first traditional segment game, then he or she has used a season of participation. To make things clear, this applies only to practice in the traditional segment. You can still practice during the non-traditional segment and not use a season. The other way to use a season of participation is if you compete in any game or competition. 2 exceptions to this rule are preseason scrimmages or exhibitions and play during the one date of competition in the non-traditional segment for the sports of baseball, field hockey, lacrosse, soccer, softball, and volleyball. For example, In baseball, there is one day in the fall where teams compete against other institutions. For those 6 sports only, a student athlete actually won't use a season of participation if he or she participates in the one date of competition during the non-traditional segment. There is one last exception for those same sports. A student athlete can also compete in your institution's alumni contest during the non-traditional segment without using a season. For all other sports, like tennis for example, if your student athletes compete in the non-traditional segment, then they will use a season of participation. Please take note, the information related to season of participation regulations can be confusing. What we don't want is for a student athlete to use a season of participation unknowingly. So if you have any questions about this as your season progresses, please stop and ask your compliance administrator for assistance. Now let's review the hardship waiver requirements that were mentioned earlier in this segment. If you have a student athlete who's injured and qualifies to get a season of participation back, you may be able to get a hardship waiver from your conference, or if you're an independent institution, from the NCAA National Office. There are 3 requirements that must be met before a student can receive a hardship waiver, and all 3 must be met. First, the student must have been injured during the first half of the traditional segment of the season. Second, you must have evidence and documents from a medical doctor that the student athlete was incapacitated for the remainder of the season and could not compete. Finally, the student athlete cannot receive a waiver if he or she competes in more than 1/3 of the contest maximums for that sport, plus 1 additional contest or date of competition. A helpful chart is located at the back of Bylaw 14 that gives you the target numbers for each sport. For questions or to get more information on Division III eligibility, talk to your institution's compliance staff for assistance.